Right. So basically, the whole framework we're leveraging in California is an affordability framework. And for simplicity's sake, the way it works is you got a 100-unit building in your base density. The city will let you do 200 units if you take a percentage of that building and restrict it at different levels of affordability. So you can do it at 50% of average, you can do it at 60%, you can do it at 80% of average, right? In exchange for that, you're able to double your number of units. At the same time, what you get is an administrative entitlement process with timelines for review. So it prevents the project from turning into this like never ending, let's study this, let's look at that cycle, right? And that has really helped us both create more affordability, more units, and more certainty for our investors.
This episode of the Student Housing Insight Podcast is sponsored by the Guarantors. If you're an operator, you know the importance of a parental guarantor. Having parental guarantors legitimizes your rent roll. But have you ever tried collecting from a parental guarantor after their student skips out or they have to be evicted? How quickly were you able to recoup lost rent from that parental guarantor? The truth is, if things get to a point where a student skips out or is evicted for non-payment, the parental guarantor doesn't care about their credit score. There may have been a job loss or even a divorce. No background check is going to tell you which parent is about to leave their spouse or has an employer who is about to downsize. So how do you eliminate that risk? I mean, reducing risk is like the top 3 responsibilities of a property manager. Well, the Guarantor's rent coverage product does just that. Not only will it ensure that you can quickly recoup lost rent, but it will also increase your prospect to lease conversion rate because you're not waiting on a parent to provide their information. This product makes so much sense for student housing assets, and that's exactly why I'm now advising my asset management clients to forget about parental guarantors and talk to the Guarantors. You can find more information about their rent coverage product as well as other risk reduction products they provide to the student housing industry by going to theguarantors.com/student. You can also find the link in the show notes. What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Dees. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If you don't know anything about Student Housing Insight, or what I'll refer to as SHI from time to time, we are a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network, share ideas, as well as data. You can find out more about the platform at studenthousinginsight.com. Again, that's studenthousinginsight.com. Also be aware that any of the links and everything that I reference throughout this podcast will also be in the show notes. So if you're driving, don't feel like you got to stop and write it down. It's all in the show notes. In addition to the podcast, we also host the industry's monthly webinar for the U.S. that's called Shop Talk. Each month, we provide a legislative and policy update that are impacting our industry. We also, at Shop Talk, provide a monthly overview of pre-leasing data on a national and a regional basis, along with a panel of operators who provide their on-the-ground observations. Month to month, we will typically also provide a topic of the month as well. So a lot of great information. And if you are involved with the operations of student housing, specifically in the U.S., we may expand it to Canada sometime soon, but you should be registered to receive our monthly invites. And you can do that by going to the website shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info. And again, we'll provide that link in the show notes, but you'll see an area there where you can register to receive updates, and you can fill out a quick form, and we'll make sure that we send you an invite to each of the Shop Talks each month. Well, if you are a regular listener to the podcast, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, you've heard me talk about the student housing crisis in California. And I know there's a general housing crisis, or at least an affordable housing crisis in California. But this is the Student Housing Insight Podcast. So we're going to talk specifically about the student housing crisis in California for this episode. So, first thing you may ask, if you haven't been involved in real estate development or operations in California, why is it so bad in California? That's probably, we could dedicate an entire series of podcast episodes to that one question. But, from just a high level, you've got very strict regulatory environment that, will make things financially unviable. You've got limited land availability, especially in this UC system, where a lot of these campuses are in urban areas. You're kind of limited to, smaller infill projects. You may have to look at putting several tracts of land together. That just extends the time. And the entitlement and permit processes can take years in California. And because, all of these factors, student housing developers have just decided to really focus on other areas within the country, especially the Southeast and the Southwest, where, land is much more available for development. And that whole process of getting a project done, can be dwindled down to 18, 24 months, with the construction process, and maybe another year for the development process. So, that goes a long ways into this. But, the need for student housing in the Southeast and the Southwest of the U.S. Is shrinking. And so now developers are going back and looking at California and saying, okay, this is still a very ripe market. There is a huge need. 10%. This was a stat that is actually in a video that I want to show here in just a second, but that came out earlier this year in 2024 that stated that 10% of college students in California are living some level of homelessness. And so, they're looking for alternative, I'll call it shelter, not housing, but shelter. And so, yeah, it's now commonplace to find students in California that are relying on camping facilities and vans just to have shelter while they're attending school. So really quick, I want to show this from a kind of an on the ground perspective. I want to show this quick clip from CBS News, who showed this back in May. Let's take a look at that.
College can be stressful with studying and meeting deadlines, but some students are struggling with a different issue: housing. Federal data shows more than 1.5 million college students in the U.S. are homeless, highlighting the nation's affordable housing crisis. The situation is even more dire in California, where 10% of California State University students are experiencing homelessness. CBS News producer Sarah Svoboda shows us how some of them are dealing with it.
My name is Carrie.
My name is Brad Butterfield.
My name is Maddie Montiel.
Welcome in. And I live in a 20-year-old school bus.
I live in my RV.
This is Pearl. I have been living RV life for almost 5 years now.
I don't feel homeless, but I am legally homeless. Honestly, it's everything in the house, just a little bit smaller, a little more condensed. This is becoming a norm for students to be able to afford college. It's much cheaper, and it's the only way I'd be able to go to school. If it wasn't for this, I wouldn't be here. What has become the most difficult thing is just finding a place to exist.
The only thing that we are ever asking for is just somewhere to park, so I have somewhere to sleep.
Just forewarning you, we have like a 3-day parking, municipal code 72 hours. And after that, we just ask that you park somewhere else.
We can only stay in this spot for 3 days for 72 hours. It gets pretty tiring having to move all the time.
Being told to leave, but not being told where to go or why we have to leave. It's just, we don't want you here. We don't want to look at you. And when you're told that by the university and now the city too, you can like brush it off, but at the end of the day, that sucks.
I'm going to a zoology class right now. I know in our institution, over the next 5 years, our tuition's going up by 34%. I feel like it's a humanitarian crisis. You have to worry about things like, how much power you have, running water, like where you're going to shower. But really the biggest stressor has been, where am I going to be safe for the night? I know some folks might say, well, you pick this lifestyle. I think it shows that we're resilient and creative, and we want to be here because we've chosen to be here, and this is how much we want to be here.
Well, I really appreciate CBS doing that. That, like I said earlier, that came out in May of this year. And the thing is when it comes to, let me just put it this way. There is a plethora of those type of stories that go back. I've been tracking it for a good 5-6 years now. And look, as a college student, almost 30 years ago, I loved a good road trip. But van life as an undergrad, that's just not safe. And as you can tell by that video, if you were watching this on our YouTube channel, these students don't appear to be homeless. They don't look unhealthy. They're certainly getting fed, and they've got good hygiene. It's not a situation where they're completely homeless. And for the students, I really give them a lot of praise because they're making sacrifices to get their education, from specific institutions. There's probably other places they could go in the country that, things would be a little bit more affordable and they could budget things a little bit better and maybe actually have stable housing. But they're also refusing to take on debt. And, that debt is readily available to college students. And so I really appreciate, them making the sacrifices that they're doing and trying to set themselves up for success. But I feel like a state like California that, let's face it, they've got the best GSP of any state in the United States. If California was its own country, they would have the 4th largest GDP in the world. Yet California residents pay some of the highest tax rates in the country. All right, this is kind of a point where I'm about to go on a rant about my deep libertarian views. So I'm going to bottle that up, really quick and just say, California, you need to do better. But until California gets their shop in order, careful there for any kids that may be listening. I want to highlight a developer in this episode who's based in California, and he's figuring out, how to make student housing projects work within the system, and is really answering the call to provide affordable housing to students. That developer is Riaz Taplin of Riaz Capital. He's the founder, as you might expect, given the name. But he's got a long track record in providing affordable workforce housing, and he's now applying that framework that he's developed to a new student housing project in Berkeley. And if things go well, he plans to tackle student housing in more California markets. And what I really love about Riaz, outside of just tackling this affordability issue, is the ability that he's been able to bring in and leverage art and thoughtful design. All of his projects are called Art House. I don't want to say all of them, but these with that he's or this particular one that he's building in Berkeley and some of the other affordable workforce housing has been branded Art House, which you can go to his website and find out more about. It's just really cool what he's doing and how he's trying to not just create something affordable for students, but also create something that they can have a lot of pride in living in and calling home. So anyway, with that being said, let's get to my interview with Riaz Taplin. Riaz, welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast.
Wes, thanks for having me.
Well, in the intro there, I gave you a little bit of, a tee up as to, what's going on in California. Folks can go out and Google California student housing shortage, and you're going to get a plethora of stories like that one from CBS and what kind of the state of affairs are. But you're one of those folks that are trying to answer the call and provide some much needed purpose-built and affordable student housing in California. So wanted to sit down and talk to you for a little bit, but before we get into all the student housing stuff, just give our audience a little bit of background on you. Would love to kind of understand your real estate journey and how that has intersected with student housing.
Wes, thanks for having me. So, I've been in, I would say the professional part of my career has been going on for about 20 years now, but I really grew up in a real estate family. So my dad, he was a condo conversion guy in the late 70s, early 80s, buying buildings, high-end neighborhoods in San Francisco, converting them into condos. And then in the 90s became more of a multifamily guy. So when I joined the business in 2003, I spent the first 5 years of my career doing luxury stuff. And then during the GFC, global financial crisis, moved into multifamily, started buying buildings, doing lease options, anything to do a deal. And then 2000, so that probably takes up to 2010, 2011. My best friend from college had been like, Morgan Stanley, Carlyle, H2 Capital, moves out to join the more entrepreneurial, never had a job guy, which is me. And we started, buying more buildings and growing our multifamily platform. And we really evolved over the decade from 2010 to 2020 into a workforce housing platform. So focused on creating a high quality product, somewhat design oriented at an affordable price for people that are working in urban areas, right? And our pilot projects were really very much in Alameda County, Berkeley, Oakland. But today we operate, in as far south as San Diego, Santa Cruz. For those who are not as familiar with the great state of California, San Diego to the south, Bay Area to the north, right? We're also in Solano County, Fairfield, Benicia. And our business is basically three verticals: student housing, workforce housing, and your classic apartments. And I think we're here to talk a little bit more about student housing, which is a relatively new initiative for us relative to the other business units.
Well, I want to dive in just a little bit with that background with your dad and the family business. Did you know, coming out of high school, real estate's what you wanted to do, or was it something that you had to come around to?
Great question. In my house, so my dad was a real estate guy. My godfather's a guy named Oz Erickson, was a real estate guy, built, probably more condos in San Francisco than anybody else in history. And my mom and my stepdad were the do-gooders. So I always say in my house, there were the do-wellers and the do-gooders. And I wanted to do something at the intersection of doing well and doing good, right? So my stepdad ran an organization called the Sierra Club, which is a large national environmental organization. Yeah. My mother did a lot of public interest work on the environment, women's issues, children and foster care and adoption type stuff. So I was like, okay, how do I do something at the intersection of real estate, which is housing, and affordability?
Yeah. So kind of answered the call that I'm sure both of your parents were putting on.
I don't want to piss anybody off, basically. Like, this one wants me to do something good. This one wants me to make $1. Okay, how do we make everybody happy?
Yeah,
the forever peacemaker.
Yeah. Now, any of your family currently involved with your firm, or?
Yeah, all four of us worked with the business at some point in time. My mom and dad worked together up until they got separated, but my mom really ran a public interest PR firm. My sister and I worked together when we had a design company. So we had for 6-8 years, my sister and I had a design build company together. We would design homes for wealthy people. We'd build the home and then we'd operate the home. And then my dad and I did all the multifamily stuff together up until he retired. He fully retired in 2019, but I took over running the platform in basically 2008, let's call it. So I've been kind of in my current job for 17 years. Gotcha. Oh my God, I'm getting old. Don't tell anybody.
Well, and since this is the Student Housing Insight podcast, we typically, talk to our guests a little bit about their college experience. I know you went to USC. So
I spent 2 years at USC. I spent a semester at the University of Malaya in Malaysia, and I spent 2 years at the London School of Economics. And I ended up graduating from the London School of Economics with a degree in economic history. My first year in student housing, and which kind of really defined what we now do in student housing, is I shared a room with my best friend and it was still miserable. And he eventually became a rock star, and it was still miserable. So it doesn't matter how cool your roommate is. It doesn't matter if he eventually becomes literally a rock star. It still sucks to share a little shoebox room with somebody. So very much what we do now in student housing was like, okay, for the same price as you'd get a bed with somebody else, how do I give somebody a room in a nice apartment with a reasonable bathroom ratio, right? And, I look back on college very fondly, but there's no part of me that looks back on college and sharing a room with people fondly.
Now you can't talk about your roommate becoming a rock star and not share who it is.
So he had and it's kind of a funny story. So like when we were in college, he'd be like, drumming, and you'd be like, Ryan, it's 7 a.m. I went to bed 4 hours ago. Right. Right. Like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm practicing. I'm like, but you're not very good. I mean, stop. And so, usually your best friend's supposed to be supportive. And I was basically the friend who was like, let's be realistic here. Okay. At the age of 32, he ended up having a top 10 American single, which is a song called Safe and Sound by a band called Capital Cities.
Okay.
And it's still since been used in a variety of commercials. And, I don't know where they made it in the global charts, but in the US, they made it to number 8.
Okay. All right. Well, fantastic. I love sharing those stories. I recently had one that involved Chris Christie that I don't think I'm going to be able to air, but we'll leave that for another day. Well, hey, so let's talk about, kind of that intersection with student housing that you were touching on a little bit ago. You got your first project that is coming up at UC Berkeley. Give us kind of the lowdown. What are the details and when do you expect for it to be operating?
Yeah. So, one thing, and when you're in student, there's all this work that people do on kind of innovation districts, and college is really an innovation district where you're learning about yourself, right? Yeah. And you really want to be as close to the activity as humanly possible. And because Berkeley really functions like the People's Republic of Berkeley, right? They've done a really poor job of creating enough housing for the students of the university. So the university, to give you some context, has 43,000 students, and Berkeley provides about 11,000 beds. And you don't need to be a math major to know 1 in 4 means 3 people need to find somewhere else to live, right? Yeah. So we did a small pilot project in Berkeley probably 10 years ago now. And very simple, a vacant building, renovated into smaller rooms and rented it out and sold it. What happened for us is, we own a couple thousand units here in Alameda County, but not very much oriented towards student housing. But we had a lot of students living in our units. So we thought to ourselves, okay, what can we do which changes our business around a little bit, but gives us an orientation to a new customer segment, student housing, right? So we went and identified a series of sites in Berkeley. And in Berkeley, it's not like you can go into Texas where you got a big piece of land next to a university. That doesn't exist. Right. So we had to basically put together 2 sites by buying 4 individual buildings in each circumstance, right? Then we use something called the California State Density Bonus to get more density. And we were actually able to get them entitled in a reasonable period of time. And the design concept we're going after is really renting a bedroom for the same price as a bed in most projects, right? To go back to your point, which is, okay, in the rest of the country, a lot of developers have moved into the market to provide more housing. People have moved into Berkeley as well. But because California and Berkeley has a reputation for being very difficult to develop in, a lot of players have stayed away from it, right? Yeah. And we felt we were well positioned to do it because, the state of California has fundamentally created 2 bodies of law to help with housing production. And for new construction, they've created a suite of laws that I'd call the California State Density Bonus group of laws. Okay. Certainty of what you can build, certainty on timeline, and the ability to sue the municipality if they don't do what they're supposed to do. For existing buildings, they've created what I'd call the accessory dwelling unit packet of laws, where you can add additional units to existing buildings by administrative right. But in other words, they've substantially de-risked the entitlement process. And because we've a very big user of this in our multifamily business, we've probably done it 10, 15 times. Okay. We're like, hey, let's just take the same laws that we use when we're doing apartments and do it for student housing. So in one circumstance, you wouldn't think about this. A normal project in a city like San Francisco is going to take 7 bloody years. We got a permit in 7 months for our entitlements in Berkeley.
Oh, wow. Right?
And that was the good one. 2 thumbs up. we had another one, Wes, where, the city wanted to send us for a little wild goose chase, right? Go review this, go study that, go do historic this. It's like, oh my God, right? But because this new law exists, AB 1633, when they told us to go do an environmental impact report, we filed a response and said, look, we've given you all the evidence that we're allowed to do this project. If you're not going to give it to us, we're going to have to sue you. Right. Now, we didn't end up suing them. We ended up coming to a reconciliation,
right,
and we then got our project approved. But the understanding of the infrastructure of these rules really is the tool by which we were able to create greater affordability in Berkeley.
Gotcha. So I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, before we get into that, because I want to talk more specific about California and some of the things you were just hitting on, but again, this new project, you gave me a little bit of a overview when we talked previously. Is there anything you want to tout about what you're putting together at Berkeley?
Yeah, sure. So there's 3 separate projects, just for clarity. There's one which, Wes, you look like where you and I could throw a rock at the university from the building because it's directly adjacent to the athletic center. There's a second one, which is about 5 blocks from the main gate of campus. Another one that's called 8 blocks from campus, directly next door to Whole Foods. So if you take it in reverse order, the last one's really kind of more of a graduate student housing, and the earlier 2 are more undergraduate student housing projects. And the one next to the Whole Foods could also be thought of as semi-workforce housing.
Gotcha.
It's also next to a hospital. And the concept behind these projects to make them affordable, right, is using the density bonus law so we get the permits quickly. We don't build garages, which is something that in the rest of the country, you'd be like, what are you, bloody crazy? But because Berkeley has so much transport and it's walking distance, everything, we're not building parking. That improves affordability. And we're fundamentally building, either 5 stories over slab or 5 stories over 1 story of concrete or 5 stories over 2 stories of concrete. But in other words, we're keeping the buildings relatively simple in order to contribute to affordability and speed.
Gotcha. So no parking garages, but I've got to ask, what are you doing for the bicycles and the scooters?
We got a lot of room for bicycles and scooters, right? And, these bicycles, I think about a bicycle as like $100 thing that you go and buy from the local stop. Some of these bikes are more expensive than a car. You're like, what is that thing? It's like, it's got 2 wheels and a little chain. Why is it so bloody expensive? So, a lot of our customers, the bike parking and the scooter storage, very important elements of a project.
Yeah. Well, you've got a fantastic painting behind you. And I know, looking at some of your other deals, you try to, mix in this art element from local artists and stuff, with your projects. Would love to kind of find out where that passion comes from. And then, is that something you plan on implementing into this student project as well?
Oh, thanks for asking that. So, one thing I really appreciate about my parents is like the exposure they gave me as a kid, right? I think by the time I was, 20 years old, I'd probably been to 30 different countries. But I really think about my parents as like Renaissance people, right? They were into art, they were into helping people, they were into doing good, but they were into art amongst other things. And how do you make someone feel special at the end of the day? And whether it's in our housing business or in our student housing business, I'm fundamentally renting and selling small spaces. And so how do you, when you go online to look at a small space or you show up at a building, how do you make it have presence and feel special? And so what we've been doing now for almost a decade, right, is branding the buildings around a specific artist. The one behind me is really cool, right, in that, this was actually a piece of graffiti that was done in my office building when it was abandoned. And I just paid this guy like $70,000 to do it on one of my buildings. So it's kind of cool that the building that we own and operate was a 110,000 square foot building where we have 90 businesses because we also is a small business center, was also the epicenter of the outdoor art movement in Alameda County in the 1980s, right? And so from that group of artists, we've actually then taken some of them and worked with them on our new construction projects. And the whole platform is called Art House. And the idea is creating a positive association with entry-level housing, in which we include student housing. So each building gets an artist, could be a local artist, could be somebody who's not local, which gives the building its own kind of flair, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is that something that you typically, when you're proposing to the city, is that something you typically, integrate into that? Is that something they want to hear about? And how, does that go a long way in, getting some favor?
Yeah, great question. One thing that we've done is most of our projects now, Wes, are entitled under this thing called the California State Density Bonus, which really removes a lot of the local jurisdictions' autonomy in slowing down a project. So as long as we're operating within the zoning and the additional density provided by state law, we are now in box checking mode. So the ability that a city has to say no is substantially diminished. That said, a lot of the, whether it's planners or, we still want to have a great relationship with everybody we work with. We're not trying to have an adversarial dynamic. This isn't a war, right? And so I think what it has done is create an identity to all of our buildings. You go by one of our buildings, you know that it's ours, right? And it's created a very tangible reinvestment thing that we're doing within the community, where we've literally pumped millions of dollars into the public art scene for Alameda County. And we'll continue to do it in Santa Cruz and San Diego and Alameda and all the other markets that we operate in.
Well, I'm not going to insult the intelligence of my audience and explain to them why it's tough to get into California, but you've had a lot of experience with it. Just kind of wondering, from a project level, is there anything tangible or anything you would point to, from a tangible standpoint that the project has to, not necessarily student housing,
it's
but
affordability.
Yeah.
Right. So basically the whole framework we're leveraging in California is an affordability framework. And for simplicity's sake, the way it works is you've got a 100-unit building in your base density. The city will let you do 200 units if you take a percentage of that building and restrict it at different levels of affordability. So you can do it at 50% of average, you can do it at 60%, you can do it at 80% of average, right? In exchange for that, you're able to double your number of units. At the same time, what you get is an administrative entitlement process with timelines for review. So it prevents the project from turning into this like never-ending, let's study this, let's look at that cycle, right?
Yeah.
And that has really helped us both create more affordability, more units, and more certainty for our investors.
Gotcha. So from a development firm standpoint, if someone's coming, in-state or from out of state into California and are looking to propose a project, what is it that, that those laws that you mentioned, as well as, the folks that these developers are going to have to propose to, what kind of things about their development firm is something that they want that you would say, hey, let's, make sure that you talk about this in your proposal?
I would say it's a 3-part process, right? There's a law called SB 330, which stands for Senate Bill 330, right? Which cements the entitlement framework as of the day you submitted your permit. And so I would say that's number one. And what that does is it prevents the city from moving the goalpost. And that was a historical problem that we had in California, where you have a piece of land, you think you understand the zoning and you think you understand what's allowed, and then they change the rule on you. And all of a sudden you're in no man's land. The second thing is then when you apply for the project, is that you apply for the project with a certain percentage of affordability, right? And that way you're running under this state regiment. And then the third piece is that if the city is, if you're on a site where you have a historic building or you have, older buildings, you have to make sure that those buildings aren't historic. But the problem is when you're doing something like a city like Berkeley or San Francisco or, an older city, it's not like you have massive sites that have no buildings on them, right? Yeah. And so, without dating you and myself, you and I are almost historic, right? And so, and the way these people work, is you give a bureaucrat a job, the worst case scenario, they might do it. So at some point, they've already deemed all the buildings which are actually historic, right? Yeah. And so then you go back to a 1950s building and this ugly piece of garbage is now historic, right? Yeah. navigating that process in terms of what is historic, what's not historic, what could be deemed historic.
Okay.
This is a very important thing to understand well. And while these laws make it much easier to operate in California than it was previously, I was on fundraising meetings the last 2 days, and I was meeting with potential clients, and I would start to talk about, these different laws, whether it's the ADU laws or the ability to sue, all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to understand how they overlay with each other and how and when to use which rule, right? And so where it's a much more certain process if you understand it, it doesn't mean that it's uncomplicated and without its pitfalls.
So either some type of track record for that is going to be good for the firm to have, or I don't know, bringing someone like yourself on as a consultant or somebody else.
We love JV deals. You bring the money, we'll get you a permit, no problem. Look, at the end of the day, we want more activity, right? And understanding how to navigate this ends up being a big part of being able to be successful, in the great state of California.
So I want to ask, anything else on the horizon, student housing wise? Are there any markets specifically you're excited about looking into?
Great question. So look, you kind of hit the nail on the head, Wes. Like, we're a California specialist. We understand all these different laws. We understand how to work with the municipalities. And if I were to come to your part of the world, I'd be like, I don't get it, right? And at the end of the day,
it's way easier in South Carolina.
But I still be like, it's too easy. It couldn't be this easy. I'll be like, I don't get it. It's not hard enough, right? And so what we see as our kind of competitive advantage, core advantage, area to focus from a student housing point of view is what are the undersupplied California markets. So. Mm-hmm. Both for the UC system, which has 9 colleges, and the state system. And a lot of time with the state system, people live at home, right? So we're a little bit more focused on the UC system. So for example, we've gone into Santa Cruz. The team has designed a fantastic project, which is half student housing, part work, and half workforce housing, similar to one of the projects we're doing in Berkeley. In San Diego, we're doing a workforce housing project. Maybe have a little bit of student overlay, but not a lot. But I'm very excited about these projects where we can design a building that has the dual purpose of providing affordability on the student side and affordability on the workforce side, such that in a situation where you don't have enough demand on one side or the other, you're able to easily rebalance it. And so, whether that's going into a market like Davis, Santa Cruz, we're already in, Santa Barbara would be awesome. I also like to go to markets to visit my projects, which are fun to visit. It's like, oh, do you want to go to Oklahoma? I don't think I want to go to Oklahoma, right? Santa Barbara at the beach sounds great, right? Let's do a project there.
Compared to Norman or Tulsa, I would much rather be in Santa Barbara, but it's there's been a lot of activity in both of those markets in Oklahoma. But listen, I appreciate the time today and kind of giving your insights and everything that you're observing and your perspective in California. And I think our audience is definitely better for it. If folks want to reach out to you about maybe potentially partnering on something or investing, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
All sorts of fun ways. Fun way number one, you go to our website, riazcapital.com. Contact us. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Riaz Taplin. I think my team tells me we are overly active on LinkedIn. And then just reaching out directly. And we're always down to have a conversation. I really appreciate all the people in my life who helped me along the way and always made themselves available. So I really try and make myself as available to young people, new developers, people wanting to get into real estate, because there's no reason for anyone to beat their head against the wall when they're doing something new. So whether it's someone young wanting to get into the business, wanting to learn, I really try and make myself as available and as open as possible.
Well, I appreciate it, Riaz, and I'm sure we'll probably see each other on the conference circuit soon. So looking forward to meeting you in person as well.
All the best. I really appreciate you inviting me on, Wes, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Well, again, a big thanks to Riaz for spending that time with us and telling us about his project and about his what he's doing in California and the group that he's working with. I'm excited to see what him and his team are going to be able to accomplish over the next few years. So stay tuned. I think we'll probably hear from Riaz again on the podcast. So looking forward to that. So what are your thoughts on this episode, specifically the student housing crisis in California? I know a lot of the audience is working in California, at a site level, or they're a regional manager. And you're kind of seeing this firsthand. So, if you have thoughts, I would love for you to, come join myself and other student housing professionals at the SHI community. It's a part of our website that works kind of like a public forum where we bring topics up like this and have it for discussion. And, regardless if it's this particular discussion that you want to join in on, or if you've got a discussion you want to start, make sure that you go there and become a member. Again, go to our website at studenthousinginsight.com and just click on the SHI community, and you'll be prompted to sign up and sign in. Also, again, I'm going to remind everybody, if you're not subscribed to Shop Talk, you need to be a part of Shop Talk and taking advantage of those monthly meetings. It's a different website for reasons I won't necessarily get into, but you can go to shoptalk.info. Again, shoptalk.info, and you can just click on, there's a option down at the bottom. It's also in the menu where it says register to receive Shop Talk notifications. And we've got our next one that is coming up on December 19th. So make sure you register before then. Well, that does it for today's episode. I think this will probably come out before December 9th. So for those of you that are attending LeaseCon, TurnCon, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I'm actually going to be hosting on December 10th. I'm going to be hosting a panel with undergrad students who have gone through that journey of finding their off-campus housing. And we want to, sit down and have an interview with them and kind of find out, what led to their decision, what played into that journey. And I think the folks that are attending that panel will get a lot out of it. So if you're attending, make sure that you attend my panel. It will actually be the only one that's happening during that time segment. So if you're not there, it means that you're out networking or doing some other work. But anyway, looking forward to seeing everybody that's going to be at LeaseCon, TurnCon. And again, if that's something that you're interested in that you haven't registered for yet, you can find a link to all of that information on our website. Well, guys, thanks so much, and we will see you soon. Take care.